Found it. Whew. Okay. This is part two of the black and tan movement of how the Republicans basically abandoned their urban voters and what led to urban folk becoming basically generational Democrats. Let's continue. The Black and Tan faction was a faction in the Republican Party in the South from the 1870s to the 1960s. It replaced the Negro Republican Party factions named after the 1890s. Southern Republicans were divided into two factions: the Lily White faction, and which was practically all white, and the biracial Black and Tan faction. The former was strongest in heavily white counties, and the final victory of its opponent, the Lily White faction, came in 1964. The disintegration of their influence in the Republican Party came about with the replacement of old right oriented politics amidst the rise of the new right under Eisenhower Republicanism. In the early years of the Reconstruction era, newly enfranchised Southern blacks in states, including Mississippi, enthusiastically threw overwhelming support to the Republican Party, which spearheaded the cause of ensuring their civil rights. They unified with a minority of racially tolerant Southern whites to form Black and Tan clubs. Within state GOPs, they clashed with scalawags, native-born Whiggish Southern whites who generally placed greater emphasis on business interests and economic expansion than safeguarding the newly secured rights of freedmen. Interesting. During Reconstruction, efforts by Black and Tan Republicans in favor of racial equality drew violence from Democratic white supremacists, including the Ku Klux Klan, who resorted to violence against the early civil rights activists. Families of Southern Republicans, both black and white, were harassed by Democratic whites. See, they never mentioned that part. Even white folk were catching hell. The increasing decline of Southern Republicanism brought about by the rise of Jim Crow led many white Republicans to view abandoning civil rights advocacy as the only means of maintaining significant party influence in the region, contributing to the rise of the Lily White movement, which would clash with Black and Tans for decades to come. The Black and Tan faction was biracial. It sought to include most African American voters within the party. They often took a prominent part in the national conventions of the Republican Party. One reason for the continuance of the Black and Tan faction was its effect in holding the African American Republican vote in northern states. The Black and Tans predominated in counties with a large black population, the whites in these counties being usually Democrats. The Lily Whites were mostly found in the counties where fewer blacks lived. Factionalism in Southern GOP politics between the Black and Tans and the Lily Whites flared up in 1928. Among the Black and Tans, Mississippi leader Perry Wilbon Howard II advocated a nomination of conservative isolationist Hamilton Fish III for vice president on the Republican ticket to maintain GOP popularity among black voters. During 1952, the United States presidential election, where factionalism once again became an intense highlight, the Black and Tan Republican delegations in the Republican National Convention that year supported the nomination of conservative U.S. Senator Robert A. Taft over Dwight Eisenhower. This included the Mississippi delegation led by Perry Wilbon Howard II. In contrast to Eisenhower, who testified in opposition to integrating the United States military in 1945, the strongly conservative Taft was devoted in his concern for blacks, continuously pushing civil rights measures in Congress. B. Carroll Reese, a pro-civil rights old right congressman from East Tennessee, predicted and adamant support for Taft from Southern GOP delegations. This proved true particularly for the states of Mississippi and Arkansas, whose delegations were led by Howard and Oswald Cobb, respectively. The influence of Eisenhower republicanism over the Republican Party resulted in a dissipation of Black and Tan influence in Southern GOP politics, particularly in 1956. The surviving Black and Tan factions lost heavily in 1964 with the nomination of Barry Goldwater for president and practically vanished. The old right is an informal designation used for a branch of American conservatism that was most prominent from 1910 to the 1950s, but never became an organized movement. Most members were Republicans, although there was a conservative Democrat element based largely in the southern United States. They are termed the old right to distinguish them from the new right successors who came to prominence in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Most were unified by their defense of authority, tradition, morality, religion, limited government, rule of law, civic nationalism, capitalism, social conservatism, anti communism, anti socialism, anti Zionism, and anti imperialism, as well as their skepticism of democracy and the growing power of Washington. The old right typically favored laissez faire classical liberalism. Some were business oriented conservatives, others were ex radical leftists who moved sharply to the right, such as the novelist John Dos Passos. Still others, such as the Democrat Southern agrarians, were traditionalists who dreamed of restoring a pre modern communal society. Above all, Murray Rothbard wrote the old right were unified by opposition to what they saw as the danger of domestic dictatorship by Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt and his New Deal program. The old right per se has faded as an organized movement, but many similar ideas are found among paleoconservatives and paleolibertarians. The old right came into being with the Republican Party GOP split in 1910 and was influenced within that party into the 1940s. They pushed Theodore Roosevelt and his progressive followers out in 1912. From 1933, many Democrats became associated with the old right through their opposition to Franklin D. Roosevelt and his New Deal coalition, and with the Republicans formed a conservative coalition to block its initiatives. Conservatives disagreed on foreign policy, and the old right favored non-interventionist policies on Europe at the start of the World War II. After the war, they opposed President Harry Truman's domestic and foreign policies. The last major battle was led by Ohio Senator Robert Taft, who was defeated by Dwight D. Eisenhower for the presidential nomination in 1952. The new conservative movement, later led by William F. Buckley, Barry Goldwater, and Ronald Reagan, adopted much of the domestic anti-New Deal conservatism of the old right, but broke with it by demanding free trade and an aggressive internationalist, interventionist, and anti-communist foreign policy. Unlike the moderate internationalist, largely Eastern Bloc of Republicans who accepted or at least acquiesced in some of the Roosevelt Revolution and the essential premises of President Truman's foreign policy, the Republican right at heart was counter-revolutionary, anti-collectivist, anti-communist, anti-New Deal, passionately committed to limited government, free market economics, and congressional as opposed to executive prerogatives. The GOP conservatives were obliged to wage a constant two-front war against liberal Democrats from without and Me Too Republicans from within. The old right emerged in opposition to the New Deal and to FDR personally. It drew from multiple sources. Hoff says moderate Republicans and leftover Republican progressives like Hoover composed the bulk of the old right by 1940, with a sprinkling of former members of the Farmer Labor Party, Nonpartisan League, and even a few Midwestern Prairie Socialists. Okay, we'll stop there. I'll do part 3 later.